All right.
I'm ready.
Good morning. My name is Fred Koesling, and I'll be leading today's service. Reverend Matt Alspaugh will be presenting our message this morning. Our opening words this morning are by John M. Higgins. Welcome to this place. This is a home where no revealed truths are promoted and no scripture or human being accepted as infallible. This is a place for searching for truth. But we are believers. We believe in intellectual freedom. We believe in justice. We believe in compassion and concern for each other and the whole world. We believe in commitment to those ideals which have made us caring and active in the struggles for human dignity. We are Unitarian Universalists. And so, I just want to welcome you with Live from Fellowship Hall. It's our LCUUF Sunday service. Our announcements were on a slideshow before the service. If you didn't see them, don't worry. They will be sent by email in the next day or so. A few notes. Our building is now open to all fully vaccinated participants. We will continue to offer our service on Zoom as we welcome people back to the building. We ask people here to continue to wear masks in the building to help prevent the spread of breakthrough COVID infections. And now, a special welcome to our visitors. If you are visiting with us for the first time or have returned or reconnected with us after a long absence, we invite you to say your name and tell us where you're from. If you're on Zoom, use the Zoom raise hand feature, or just turn your video on and wave your hand and we'll ask you to unmute. If you're in the room, just raise your hand. All right. And do we have anybody on Zoom this morning?
I'm seeing no one on Zoom waving their hand.
Our chalice lighting words today are by Gregory David Miller. This fire is a reminder of the light within us all, the yearning for freedom, the longing for truth, the flame of intuition, the torch of conscience. We dedicate this service to the remembrance of this holy light. Now, let us light our chalice with these words that we sing together. We kindle this light and celebration for the life that we share. Our hymn is Mother Spirit, Father Spirit. This hymn was written by Norbert Kapek, a Unitarian minister in Czechoslovakia who was murdered by the Nazis in the Dachau death camp during World War II.
Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, where are you? In the sky song, in the forest sounds, you cry. What to give you, what to call you, what
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can type it into the chat now, and we'll read those aloud. First, let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You're welcome to type those sorrows and concerns into the chat box. First, we will start with the folks here to give you on Zoom time to type. Are there any sorrows or concerns that people would like to share here in the room? Do we have any sorrows to be shared on Zoom?
Yes, we do, Fred. From Trudy Crippen, she voices a concern for Sharon Robinson, who continues to suffer from lung problems that continue to hang on after her pneumonia. From Ellen McFarland, she asks that we light a candle for the death of Bishop Desmond Tutu. And also from Trudy Crippen, please light a candle of concern in silence.
Now let us recall the joys, whatever you may be holding that evokes a feeling of joy or peace within yourself or others. You are welcome to type the joys in the chat box. And again, we'll start with the folks here. Are there any joys that people would like to share here in the room? Are there any joys to be shared on Zoom?
Yes, we have a number of joys. From Fred and Mardell Harland, they say, we are delighted that our son Chris, daughter-in-law Rebecca, and grandsons Sebastian and Andrew are arriving late Sunday from New York City to spend a week with us. From Hannah Frederick, she says, thank you everyone for the recent past support in my challenge without Howard. Meant a lot. I wish you a lovely season and a happy new year. And from Trudy Crippen, a joy for Christmas with family.
And this candle from our care team represents those sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, losses that remain present with us every day. So many of us have burdens, anger, fear, and frustration. All of those things that weigh heavily on our hearts. We light this candle for all of those unspoken sorrows.
Good morning. So I invite you now into a time of quiet reflection, a time of meditation. And if you're so inclined, a common style of meditation is a concentration practice, attempting to quiet the mind, attempting to rein in the wandering thoughts that come up. And in such a kind of concentration meditation, we often find something to focus on. Many times, of course, it's the breath. The breath is always with us. It's always a tool we can access. But at other times, we might want to focus on some other object of meditation. And so I invite you to consider now focusing on the flame of the chalice as an object of meditation. To simply bring your eyes to the flame, to look at the flame closely. You might focus on even parts of the flame, the edges of the flame, or the tip. Perhaps you might notice the little darkened part at the bottom of the flame. Sometimes it's blue on a candle flame, but on this oil lamp, it's simply a darkened area. Just find parts of the flame, a part of the flame that you might focus your attention on. And as thoughts arise, just return to the flame. And if your eyes wander, just gently bring them back. Maybe notice the flickering of the flame. And as we return to this space, know that at any time you can use an object like this as a way to settle your wandering mind, to bring your mind away from sometimes difficult, painful thoughts and return to a place of being at ease and comfort. Thank you.
Today's reading is from the New Testament, from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 13 through 23. An angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, to those who were seeking the child, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene.
So kind of a downer topic, right? Maybe we can lighten it up. I don't know. So a few weeks ago, I was talking with a friend of mine who is also a minister at a mainline Christian church. Somehow we touched on what we were working on for the holidays, and I said I'd be speaking on Slaughter of the Innocents. She was quite surprised and said she'd never preached on that topic, and thankfully she didn't have to. And she asked me why I had chosen such a topic, and I told her that, well, there's a story behind this, which I will share with you, but not right yet. But before I do, it's helpful to know a little bit about the lectionary and lectionary preaching. The lectionary is typically used in Catholic and most mainline Protestant churches. For example, Anglican, Presbyterian, Lutheran, some Methodist churches. The lectionary is a schedule listing specific biblical texts that preachers in these various Christian denominations are expected to preach about on particular Sundays. It's based on a 3-year cycle, and it covers much of the Bible during this time. So if you are a regular attendee of one of these churches, then you will have had a lesson from many of the chapters of the Bible over the course of 3 years. Now, there is some flexibility. As a preacher, you can choose from 4 readings from various parts of the Bible for any particular Sunday. So if you don't want to deal with some problematic text, you can just choose one of the other ones. And so preachers in these denominations, like my friend, are called lectionary preachers because they're expected to explore one of the week's lectionary texts in their preaching. On the other hand, most Unitarian Universalist preachers are called thematic preachers because we're expected to start with some theme, typically of our own choosing, and find readings related to that theme and develop our message around that theme. Now, let me briefly note that each preaching style has its benefits. A lectionary preacher has a frame, some specific topics, some specific Bible verse to work with, so they can quickly get focused. As a lectionary preacher, you're less likely to be staring at a blank page saying, "What the hell am I going to write? What the hell am I going to say on Saturday night, late, or with one of my UU friends, Sunday morning?" Plus, there are all kinds of materials, magazines, emails, websites that can help a lectionary preacher with ideas, with stories, even if whole sermons, if you're the plagiarizing kind of preacher, that fit the lectionary topic for Sunday. On the other hand, a thematic preacher has complete freedom to pick the topics that we like. That's wonderful. But a danger is that we can keep returning to our favorite topics, and sometimes we don't even notice. So please, if you see me falling into a rut, let me know. So back to the slaughter of the innocents, this last chapter of the whole narrative of Jesus' birth in the book of Matthew. Hence the title of this service, after the birth, the slaughter. Now, the slaughter of innocents story is, in fact, part of the lectionary. It's up for the first Sunday after Christmas, once every 3 years. I suspect that most ministers, like my friend, avoid it or choose one of the other texts to preach on instead. But on to my story. Back to me. Why am I preaching this crazy topic? I'm returning to this topic because I was once required, compelled to preach on it early in my career. You see, in our Unitarian Universalist denomination, credentialed ministers are required to complete, in addition to a Master of Divinity degree, a year of full-time internship or equivalent, typically serving a congregation. In 2007, I served my internship at Unity Church Unitarian, this is the picture, in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's a large church, some 600 members. It had two full-time ministers, and so it was able to support interns, which it did year after year. It was considered a desirable internship site, and I was glad to have been accepted there. Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs was my internship supervisor, and he assigned me numerous tasks, as you would expect, teaching classes, visiting elders, organizing a men's retreat, as well as preaching on certain Sundays. For the Sunday after Christmas, he gave me an unusual assignment, and you know where this is going. He told me to preach on the slaughter of the innocents. He made it clear that he wanted to see how I would do preaching from the Bible. I later figured out that Rob gave this assignment to every intern he had. It became a bit of an entertainment for the congregation to see what these interns, these ministers to be, would do with a challenging topic. It was one way to get folks, probably burned out from Christmas, to show up on an otherwise lightly attended Sunday, just to see the interns squirm. That picture of me, by the way, was a fake. I was probably smiling too much for it to be real. Now, I learned that other interns had approached this text in different ways. Like, for example, how could a loving God allow something like this slaughter to happen? One intern even explored what it must have been like to be Rachel, whose sons had been killed. I decided to take a different tack. I wondered how Jesus would have felt as a kid when he learned that all the kids his age in his hometown had been killed because of him. At that time, I said, and I quote myself in that sermon, maybe Jesus was asking his family about his birth, and someone let the story slip. Perhaps Jesus asked his dad, Joseph, Dad, why didn't we return to Bethlehem? And Joseph, caught off guard, might have said something like, well, son, that wouldn't have been a good idea because you wouldn't have had any playmates. And Jesus' next question would have certainly begun with the word, why? And Joseph would want to change the subject. But of course, Jesus would have found out, and I'm sure it would have affected his life. This is, of course, survivor guilt. The great French writer Albert Camus, in his book, The Fall, considered this idea and suggested that such knowledge might have led Jesus to self-destructive behavior and ultimately to his own crucifixion. Somehow, and hey, I was new at this stuff, I was able to link survivor guilt to all of us, that we all shared some kind of guilt over the destruction wrought by climate change, and that we all contributed to it just by virtue of living in an industrialized society. We can't get around it, and that we have to carry that guilt with us, and that we should transform that guilt into compassionate action to awaken, to become at one with the possibilities of hope and redemption that exist in the world. Now, apparently I passed the test. Rob, my supervisor, commented that he didn't expect much of me in this sermon because I'd gone to Star King School for the Ministry, the UU Seminary in Berkeley, California. It's a seminary known for many things, but biblical scholarship, not so much. Today I'd approach this text differently. I'll talk about that a little later in part 2 of this sermon.
This reading is by Bart Ehrlman, a professor of New Testament at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. This reading is from his blog. It's called A Historian's Wish List. Historians obviously have to devise criteria for determining which sources can be trusted and which cannot, much as a jury in a murder trial has to decide which of the witnesses called to the stand can be believed. In reconstructing any past event, whether an air disaster in 1930 or a heresy trial in 1030 or a crucifixion in year 30, an ideal situation would be to have sources that A, are numerous so that they can be compared to one another, the more the better, B, derive from a time near the event itself so that they were less likely to have been based on hearsay or legend. C, were produced independently of one another so that their authors were not in collusion. D, do not contradict one another so that one or more of them is not necessarily in error. E, are internally consistent, not COVID, allergies, so that they show a basic concern for reliability, and F, are not biased toward the subject matter, so that they have not skewed their accounts to serve their own purposes. Are the New Testament Gospels our principal sources for reconstructing the life of Jesus these kinds of sources? Before pursuing the question, let me emphasize once again that I am not passing judgment on the worth of these books, not trying to undermine their authority for those who believe in them, or asking whether they are important as religious or theological documents. I am instead asking the question of the historian, are these books reliable for reconstructing what Jesus actually said and did? How do they stack up against our wish list?
Thank you, Annie. First, let me address various subgroups of folks that might be listening to me today. In the preaching biz, we call this accommodation, which is letting people know that we see you, that we're aware of you, even if we are, as a preacher, not addressing you directly today. That's a weird construction, kind of like the kingly we. I didn't mean to go there, but... Now, so, some of you this morning on Zoom or in person may find no value in the Bible. You may see it as a total fabrication, that Jesus didn't exist, etc., etc. You may not even see it as having any poetic or literary value. I'm not addressing this part of the talk to you. You've already made up your mind, and that's fine. Others of you may see the Bible as fundamentally true, even the inerrant Word of God. I rather doubt there are many of you here in this congregation, but if you are here, we welcome you. You stretch us to be as open as possible to the variety of beliefs that many people have. But you're probably not going to find this part of my talk useful either. But between those extremes are many who wonder what we can get out of the Bible, or for that matter, other sacred texts. The Talmud, the Bhagavad Gita, the Diamond Sutra, or whatever. You may, in particular, wonder about such texts. How can we evaluate the truth claims they make? What can be trusted? The hard truth is that we can't really pin down certainty in these cases. The best we can do is develop likelihoods, guesstimates, credences about events in the past. Bart Ehrman, a biblical scholar, gave us a pretty good working list of tools that we heard earlier in that reading that can be used to help get a sense of trustworthiness of the various texts. We heard that those listed in the reading. The tools can give us a better understanding of what might have actually happened in the past. Let's apply some of these tools to this gruesome text in the book of Matthew. First, we asked, are there numerous other sources? We find there are no other accounts of King Herod slaughtering children. The story only appears in Matthew and nowhere else, not in the Bible, not in external sources, Roman records, nowhere. That in itself should make us suspicious. Secondly, does the story derive from a time near the event? This account in Matthew was written down at least 70 years after the event, probably longer. It almost certainly wasn't written by my namesake, the disciple named Matthew. This delay in time means that any original story had to be passed on as oral tradition and likely would have become distorted, intentionally or unintentionally. If we had multiple sources, we could ask if they were produced independently of one another rather than just being copies or derivatives. But with only one source, we can't even ask that question. That's a concern. Same about contradictions. With just one source, we can't hold it up against other sources for independence, consistency, or contradiction. That's worrisome also. But perhaps the one positive thing about this source text is that within Matthew, it appears internally consistent. So we're 1 for 5 right now. And finally, we can ask if this story is biased towards the subject matter. This, I think, is really important. Does this story seem to have a marketing spin? Is it some kind of puff piece, some kind of promo bit designed for image enhancement? Okay, I'm being a little bit critical here. But a careful reading of this part of Matthew does suggest bias. Why? We should remember that in the early Christian church, in those first 100 years or so after Jesus' death, that church was really insignificant, small, just a tiny religion, competing with numerous other religions for converts and power. So Jesus, as the Christian church's prophet, may have had some nice things to say, but really he was just another random prophet whose words competed with the words of all the other prophets that existed in this time. So how would you, as a marketing agent for those early Christians, make Jesus stand out? One thing you could do is to make Jesus appear somehow connected to, but better than, one of the larger, more respected religions in the Roman Empire, like Judaism. You see, while most Romans were pagans, and they had their own gods, many of them were curious about the Jews and the Jewish God, and they respected Judaism as an ancient religion. So if you, as copy editor for Jesus, could somehow connect Jesus to Judaism, that would be powerful. And that should be easy, right? After all, Jesus was a Jew. But better yet, make him the new Jewish leader, the Messiah, and show that that ancient Jewish scripture predicted Jesus' appearance. Maybe go further. How about making Jesus equivalent to the biggest human figure in the Jewish Bible, Moses? Make Jesus into Moses 2.0, new and improved. That's what the writer of Matthew appears to do. So in the Jewish book of Exodus, the Pharaoh has a lot of infants killed to try to kill Moses. And so here we are. A similar story shows up in the Christian book of Matthew as the slaughter of innocents. And further, all that travel of Jesus and his family to Egypt, from Egypt to Nazareth, and all of this is to fulfill predictions in the Jewish Bible. We're told this straight up in the text, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. So what do we make of this story of the slaughter of innocents? I agree with most Bible scholars that it's pretty unlikely that this story actually happened. It appears that this story was added as an attempt to make the religion of Jesus more attractive to others, perhaps to Jews, perhaps to those curious about Judaism, and to win converts. Now, I want to be clear. There are many parts of the Bible that I find believable and valuable. I find the work of responsible critics like Ehrman helpful in evaluating texts from the Bible and for me to draw spiritual sustenance from those parts. But the slaughter of innocents is not believable to me, nor does it have much of spiritual value to offer. Now, I went through this discourse not merely to show you how responsible Bible scholars analyze texts. But let me be clear, this is not just a religious exercise, an academic exercise, sorry. I think this has urgent implications for our times. You see, we live in a time when we're flooded with information and misinformation. There is fake news everywhere. Even things that we used to be able to trust, like pictures and videos, can now be fabricated as so-called deep fakes. Once YouTube has your number, YouTube will happily feed you conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. And let's not even talk about Facebook. We need to learn to apply the same kind of tools that these biblical scholars use to our own critical thinking about the stories we encounter in our daily lives. We ask ourselves, are there numerous sources? How close to the eyewitness are these sources? Are there multiple non-colluding witnesses? Is the story consistent? Where's the bias? Does the story serve the people telling it? And as you think about the fake news swirling around, the conspiracy theories, both conservative and liberal, think about how they might be tested with a few tools like these. You might find this kind of critical evaluation helpful as you try to discern what's true and useful for you. But let's be honest. You probably will not be able to convince many of those true believers of these fake news stories and theories. Remember, the visions of infants slaughtered and mothers wailing is just too vivid, too horrible, and also too believable for those inclined to believe. And so modern stories, whether they're about child sex trafficking, microchips in vaccines, or explosives planted in the Twin Towers, these are just too vivid and believable for those inclined to believe. Such believers accept such stories with a fervent sense of certainty, and it's a real challenge to persuade such true believers to do their own critical evaluation as we described here. We'll save how to address that challenge for another day. Truth is a precious thing. It's hard-won, difficult to obtain. Getting to the truth is like sifting through ore for precious gems, sorting through tons of rock to find a few rubies or sapphires. The work of finding truth is made so much harder if we're surrounded by people who are dumping worthless tailings onto the ore pile from which we work. But that's where things stand today. And even if we cannot convince those true believers, we ourselves must continue to dig for truth. We must remind ourselves that truth is often shrouded in uncertainty, and that we need to be humble before the truth and willing to change our minds if new facts become available. As rational thinking people, we cannot lose sight of the actual facts. Together, we must continue to do our utmost to put truth-seeking to good as we shape and live into our future. May it be so.
This is the time in our service when we ask that you remember that we share our gifts here through pledging and donations. Instructions for payment to the fellowship are on a slide during the announcements before the service every week. The people here at the fellowship will pass a basket. And while you are considering your gifts to the fellowship, remember that each month, LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization in our lakeside community. We share 1/2 of the offering collected at the fellowship each week with that organization. For the month of December, we've been supporting Poco a Poco. During the depths of the pandemic, Poco a Poco provided food aid to 2,000 families a week in several of the poor communities east of Chapala. They continue to provide food aid as well as other assistance. If you're not attending the fellowship in person, please donate to Share the Basket when you pay your pledge. Donate to Share the Basket separately, or indicate what part of your donation is for Share the Basket. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Let us extinguish our chalices with these words which we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world.
The path towards truth is not an easy one, for walking the path requires much commitment and effort. Let us not be deceived by those offering easy answers to hard questions, nor let us be drawn down the easy paths that lead to the wilderness of false certainty. Rather, let us recommit to the work of following our own hard-won paths to our own truths. May it be so.